They are a vehicle for me to build up my reading muscles. That's a quotation from the wonderful David Novak. I have to stop myself saying David Novak in the Czech pronunciation. But the wonderful David Novak at David Novak Reads Poetry. It's a great channel. Go check it out. And his latest video, of which I'll leave a link to down below, is what inspired this video today. Hello everybody, welcome to and welcome back to my channel, Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark, and I hope you're doing very well indeed. So, in that video, David said that picking up a chunkster has worked well for him so far this year, and it's allowed him to flex and give a workout to his reading muscles. And I have to say, I wholeheartedly agree, because both David and I, along with some other wonderful people, read Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace in the month of January, and most of us got it done within the month to 6 weeks reading. And it's a big book, it's a real chunker, and it got me thinking about the fact that, what David says is true. I had the same experience. I found it actually set me up already in good stead this year. So I started off quite slowly in the year trying to get through. This is the funny thing, isn't it? I can't remember, maybe it was 400 pages, something like that. Zadie Smith's The Fraud. But it was a chore. It was a real chore. It was much harder to read Zadie Smith's book, sorry Zadie, should you be watching, than it was to read this massive classic. It was much harder to get through. And it took me a couple of weeks before I actually finished my first book of the year. And it was difficult to read that, and then I read a non-fiction work as well about the lives of ancient Egyptians at the same time, whilst trying to read War and Peace. But I found, once I got those other two out the way, and I concentrated on War and Peace, it went very, very smoothly. You find yourself getting into something akin to a groove, I suppose, and as David says, you flex or you work out your reading muscle, should there be such a thing, or the part of your brain, I suppose, that allows you to read. And I think in many ways, these big books, these so-called chunksters, do serve as a wonderful vehicle for that. Because once I finished War and Peace, which was my third book to finish this year, I picked up a few smaller books and had other books that I had to get finished, but I just shot them off. Yeah, so I ended up pretty much going into last weekend, so 5 weeks into the year, with 7 books under my belt. 7 books. That's unheard of for me. 7 books in 5 weeks, and one of them was War and Peace. I have to say, there must be something to it. There really must be something to it. And a similar thing did happen to me last year when I tackled, as my first book of the month, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. But it took me longer to read because I didn't concentrate on it. I still tried to finish off other things at the same time, so it kind of dragged out. Whereas once I'd worked out that I, got those 2 other books out of the way, and I focused all my attention on getting through War and Peace, which maybe sounds like a negative, it certainly wasn't, it was a joy, it went rather quickly, and I was able to finish on the last day of the month, which, as I said in an earlier video, my What a Corker video, gave me a certain sense of achievement. And I think that's another plus for these massive books. A lot of these huge chunkers, I'm not talking necessarily about those huge fantasy books. I think it's a little bit different. But a lot of these giant classics, these huge, thick classics, if you're able to get through them, you do end up with a sense of achievement. You can look back and say, wow, I've read War and Peace, I've read The Count of Monte Cristo, I've read Les Miserables. Now, maybe that sounds like you're being a bit kind of prideful and show-offy, but you know, obviously you don't go out and, you know, shout it out to everybody and say, hey, I've joined the elite club of people who've read War and Peace, you know, whatever. Well, you might do, I suppose, a little on something like BookTube, but I don't mean it in that way. It's a sense of self achievement, something you can say, oh yeah, I've done that. You know, I was able to start that book and finish that book. And I think that sense of accomplishment is extremely satisfying and a very nice way to kick off a new year. And as David says again, because these big books do, at least in my experience and certainly in his experience, seem to serve as a vehicle for stimulating our reading, that when we come to shorter books, other books, it becomes somewhat easier. You know, I read Turgenev's Fathers and Sons, you know, within 2 days. It's not a big book, it's 200 something pages, but, you know, I didn't spend the whole time reading, but I was able to just kind of fly through it and absorb it because, you know, I'd been working out in the mental gym of War and Peace. So there's that. There's the joy that comes from that satisfying sense of self-accomplishment. There is also the sense of perhaps some form of betterment within yourself, that you have been able to maybe complete a work of somewhat cultural significance. You've challenged yourself and you've come through at the other end, as it were. And then there's, you know, also the huge sense of immersion that these chunksters provide you. You get lost in it. I found myself living, breathing, eating War and Peace. You know, I was in that world even after I finished it, even after I put it down for the day and went off to sleep. I was so immersed in that, and that is a joy, something that perhaps you wouldn't get in a shorter book, right? Now, I know, you know, another thing as well is you can end up with really complex narratives, and you can go into subjects in depth and in great detail, which might not be for everybody. But you can certainly pack a lot more in to a big book. At least that, I suppose, is the idea. Perhaps there are, of course, big books out there which say a whole load of nothing. I don't know. But there is a certain joy that comes from reading these chunksters that maybe you just don't get from your normal 300-page novel. Now, you cannot read probably 1,000-page plus books every single month. Like overdoing it in the gym, you may well overdo it there. But I think they can act as a stimulus to improving your reading. So if you pick up, you know, one of these massive books 2 or 3 times a year, it may well help you face the other reading that you have to do in a way where your brain is ready for it, perhaps. I don't know. These are just some thoughts, and I'd love to know your thoughts down below as to what you think the joy of reading chunky books are. And you may well be one of these people who's very intimidated by them. And yes, there is, of course, that element that comes. But I have to say, in my own experience at the moment with reading, especially these newer translations of works like Les Miserables and War and Peace, there's nothing intimidating about them other than the size. And when you think that the books themselves are so varied and so full of different tangents and different things, it can almost feel like you're just reading a series, or you're reading a few different books at one time whilst you're actually reading one of them. So I don't think that necessarily has to be too intimidating. You know, plenty of us can read 3, 4, maybe even 5 300+ page books in a month. So what's the difference between reading those and reading one big book? You know, it's not like you're bogged down in there and nothing is happening. Certainly in the cases of these wonderful classics, you know, you are actually getting involved in an entire ecosystem and world, the likes of which you haven't experienced probably before if you've never tried reading one of these books. So my advice to you is give it a go. You lose nothing by embarking on the journey. You'll only regret never leaving the house, if that works. But I, so far, have fallen in love with these big books, and I plan to read as many of them as I can throughout the course of each year without, of course, overdoing it. That's all I have to say, I guess. Please, as I say, do let me know what you think, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. I look forward, of course, to reading your comments about what you think about these so-called chunksters. Thanks for watching. Thanks also to my wonderful Patreons, or patrons I should say, on Patreon. I really appreciate your support, and should you wish to join them, of course, the link will be down below. Do take care, everybody, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.
So high, I'm hypnotized. What's up is down, what's left is right. Chasing stars and holding you. I can't see the end, but we'll see it through. Flying, get on board. We're smiling on top of the world. Dangerous times, don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world, but keep the sky in your mind.